Hello there! My name is Boaz, and I own a pretty big farm in Bethlehem. It's harvest season now, which means my fields are bustling with workers and the air is thick with the scent of ripe barley. It's my favorite time of the year, except for the sneezing. Yes, I sneeze a lot around barley. One sunny morning, as I was surveying my land and trying to avoid tripping over my own feet, I'm not the most graceful landowner you'll meet, I spotted someone new among the gleaners. Gleaners are folks who pick up what the harvesters leave behind. It's allowed in our laws to help those who have less. This person was a young woman, working diligently, and, well, she was doing it all wrong. Instead of picking up just the leftovers, she somehow managed to gather almost perfect sheaves. "Who is this, a barley thief?" I whispered to myself, chuckling at the thought. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to approach her. Trying to look dignified and landowner-like, I marched over. Halfway there, my foot found a rogue barley stalk, and down I went, sprawling in the field. So much for dignity. From the ground, I looked up to see her trying not to laugh. Her smile was like the sun breaking through after a week of rain. "Hello," I managed to say, still half entangled in barley. "I'm Boaz, the owner of this field. You're doing an excellent job, gleaning." I finally stood up, brushing straw off my robes. My cheeks were probably redder than the sunset. "I'm Ruth," she replied, her voice gentle yet strong. "I'm new here. Thank you for letting me glean in your field." "Oh, it's my pleasure. And please feel free to drink from the water jars my workers use when you're thirsty," I stammered, wondering why I suddenly felt like a schoolboy talking to his first crush. Ruth nodded, her eyes sparkling with gratitude, and maybe amusement at my barley-covered state. "Thank you, sir. You are most kind," she said. As she turned back to her gleaning, I stood there a moment longer watching her work. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a subtle grace, that made me want to know her more. Not just because she was pretty good at accidentally collecting the best barley. Ever since that hilariously awkward meeting with Ruth in the barley field, I found myself quite distracted. I'm Boaz, the landowner, yes, but suddenly I'm also Boaz, the not-so-secret admirer of a remarkable gleaner. The next morning, with a plan bubbling in my mind, I set out to discreetly learn more about Ruth. I say discreetly, but let's just say subtlety isn't my strongest suit. I casually strolled up to my foreman, pretending to be deeply interested in the barley. "So who's that new worker, the diligent young woman?" I asked, nodding towards Ruth as if I hadn't been thinking about her all morning. "Oh, Ruth. Everyone knows you've been watching her, sir," he chuckled, shaking his head. My face must have turned the color of pomegranates, so much for my undercover skills. Deciding to embrace my not-so-secret interest, I invited Ruth to join me for lunch. I wanted to impress her, so I began praising the bread we were about to eat. "You must try this bread. Our cook has outdone himself. It's possibly the best in Bethlehem," I proclaimed. Ruth smiled, a twinkle in her eye. "I'm glad to hear that, sir. I baked it this morning." Well, foot in mouth again. I laughed, and so did she, and somehow my blunder made the meal even more enjoyable. As we shared bread, her bread, and olives, I learned more about her story, her resilience, and her kindness. It made me admire her even more. After lunch, I pulled aside a couple of my workers. "Make sure Ruth gets the best of the harvest, and, let's leave extra sheaves accidentally on purpose for her to glean," I instructed them, trying to sound nonchalant. They exchanged knowing grins. My attempts at subtlety were clearly a lost cause. As the days passed, Ruth continued to glean in my fields, and I continued to find excuses to visit her. Whether I was inspecting the barley or ensuring the water jars were full. Every encounter left me more enchanted by her grace and warmth. One afternoon, as I watched her work from a distance, trying to decide if I was too old to feel like a smitten schoolboy, my young nephew ran up to me. "Uncle Boaz, why do you keep staring at that lady? If you like her so much, why don't you just tell her?" The harvest was coming to a close, and with it, our annual festival was fast approaching. I, Boaz, the somewhat clumsy but well-meaning landowner, had finally decided to step out from behind my sheaves of barley and make a grand gesture to Ruth. But first, I had to plan the perfect proposal, without tripping over my own feet or getting tangled up in decorations. I spent the days leading up to the festival nervously planning. In a moment of desperate creativity, I practiced my proposal speech to a rather bemused sheep who seemed to approve, or at least it didn't run away. Meanwhile, my cheeky young nephew offered unsolicited advice. "Just tell her she's nicer than fresh bread and sweeter than honey on figs," he suggested with a grin. The day of the festival arrived, and Bethlehem was alive with music, dancing, and laughter. The air was scented with roasting meats and fresh bread, including Ruth's, which was indeed the best in town. My heart was pounding louder than the drummers as I searched for the right moment to pull Ruth aside. My first attempt was interrupted when a group of children, chased by a rather frantic sheep, collided into me, sending us all sprawling into a heap of festival garlands. As I untangled myself from a mess of flowers and ribbons, I caught Ruth's eye across the square, and her laughter rang out like a clear bell. Embarrassed but undeterred, I patted down my robes and tried again. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the festival, I found Ruth admiring a display of local crafts. Taking a deep breath, I approached her, my hand surprisingly steady as I took hers. "Ruth, these past weeks, watching you become a part of this community, seeing your kindness and your strength, I've found myself hoping you might become a permanent part of my life," I stammered, the rehearsed words slipping away as I spoke from the heart. Could you consider becoming my wife?" Ruth's eyes widened, and for a moment I feared I had been too hasty. But then her face broke into a wide, joyful smile. "Boaz, I would be honored to marry you," she said. As she accepted, the crowd around us, who had somehow caught wind of my intentions, likely thanks to my not-so-subtle nephew, erupted into cheers. We were swept up in a wave of well wishes, with folks clapping us on the back and offering blessings. Amidst the celebration, my clumsy proposal, complete with its festive entanglements, felt just right. As we danced together under the stars, with the whole town sharing in our joy, I realized that life with Ruth would be full of laughter and love, unexpected adventures, and the warmth of community. As the festival wound down and the last notes of music faded into the night, Ruth and I walked hand in hand, our path lit by lanterns swinging gently in the breeze. We talked about our future, about blending our lives together like the grains of a rich harvest. Reflecting on the journey that led us here, from a humorous meeting in a barley field to a heartfelt proposal amid a bustling festival, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the best stories are those filled with genuine moments of joy and a touch of delightful imperfection. And as Ruth squeezed my hand, I knew we were just at the beginning of our own beautiful story.